an opportunity to see how we can bring a more holistic understanding of value into decisions that are made on projects. So I'm going to briefly introduce myself before introducing Paul and Joe, and then we're going to probably move into some insights, as I say, from my involvement and AC's involvement in the various playbooks. So I'm Conor McCarthy. I'm a technical director within WSP's Infrastructure and Core Plus business. We sit kind of more in our investment advisory sector. My experience and my background is engineering, procurement, contract management, involved in major infrastructure from highways, rail, and also local development. As I said, I was involved in developing the value toolkit. I've also been doing some work with NEC around outcome-based approaches and adopting the NEC contract to facilitate that. Keen to obviously push value-based procurement ahead and see where it goes over the coming years. Next, we have Paul Henty, and Paul is a partner with Bela Co. And advises on a range of regulatory matters as well as general corporate and commercial law. I think he's got a wealth of experience across a number of sectors, so it'll be great to hear from him today. And a recognised career as a recommended lawyer with Legal 500 and as a leading individual with Chambers and Partners. So he's going to bring extensive experience in all kind of matters related to public and utilities procurement, and hopefully give us a bit of insight into his views on the Procurement Act and what the new regulations mean. Then we're going to hear from Jo. Jo is head of procurement at National Highways, and she's part of that procurement leadership team and has a proven track record of delivering senior roles across a range of industries. She's passionate about developing strategies which enable social enterprises and SMEs to become involved in public sector delivery environment, and is also keen on developing inclusive commercial and procurement strategies and allowing teams to deliver at pace. Jo will speak to us about the new Procurement Act itself, and also a little bit around how National Highways are approaching procurement on a value-based basis going forward. I will note, however, that at this point, any questions relating to the future about value-based decision-making in current programmes is probably off the table due to the general election. So we'll hear a bit more about where things are going in National Highways shortly. But please do, I suppose, take note of that any questions we won't be able to answer today on that regard. Okay, I'm now going to very quickly, if you could pass the slide forward, Andrew, just cover some of my own personal insights and reflections from ACE's and personal involvement in the contract management and construction playbooks. Construction Playbook was published in 21. It's been iteratively developed since then and improved along the way. And then recently, last year, the Contract Management Playbook was developed and started by government. It's not been published yet, from my understanding. It will pop, hopefully by the end of the year, will have been published. And again, what it tries to do is complement the consultancy playbook, the sourcing playbook, and the construction playbook, and provide a lot of valuable and direct guidance to contract managers across government about how to manage those contracts that come out of the guidance in the various other commercial playbooks. And I think stepping up from the individual playbooks and the value toolkit and everything that's been happening over the past few years in the industry around value-based procurement, there's some kind of key themes that come to mind. So firstly, an outcome-based approach. There is more and more focus on the outcomes that need to be delivered and about understanding the value of those outcomes and how do you then achieve that. It's essentially becoming more and more central to decision making, guiding everything from developing your delivery model, your business case, the procurement of contractors and services and consultants, all the way through to the actual contracting of those services. Another key is value-based procurement, which is one of the key points of today. And it's about really kind of taking that more holistic focus across an evaluation of value across procurement decisions, not just cost, and trying to move away from that lowest cost approach. And then to kind of combined with that, you have the performance management enhancement. So looking at defining KPIs and SLAs based on outcomes, linking back to that first outcome-based approach element, and using that to improve contract management, to focus on delivery of those outcomes throughout the contract lifecycle itself. And then ultimately, we're all well aware of the changes that are happening in terms of procurement regulation. I think one I'd like to personally draw out just now is the shift from most economically advantageous tender to the most advantageous tender. I think potentially allows for a wider value of definition. which is not linked specifically to cost, which I think when you combine it with some of the new routes, may give contracting authorities the ability to be a bit more flexible about how they make procurement decisions, and obviously open or provide a platform for building in more of a value-based approach to those decisions. So just to kind of round off, I think it's been very interesting to see the development of this side of industry to date. I think it is headed in a certain direction, which will hopefully move away from a lowest cost approach to making decisions, about thinking about what value means to a client and a project and a program, and about making decisions that secure that value and secure those outcomes. So I'm now going to pause on my reflections. I'll bring more in later on the value toolkit as we start to hear from Paul and Joe. And I'm going to pass you across to Joe, and Joe's going to kind of give you an intro as we discussed earlier. I think you're on mute, Joe.
Yeah, hello.
Apologies, I'm after mixed up. Paul, apologies.
Thank you.
You okay, Paul?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Absolutely, all good.
Okay, fantastic. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today and to be talking to you all about something so topical. I'm really pleased to have been invited. As Connor mentioned, my name is Paul Henty. I'm a partner at Beale & Co. And a lot of our work is with the construction industry. I'm sort of a little bit strange within the parish because I work with a lot of other sectors as well, apart from construction. But construction is a lot, and engineering is a large part of my work. So a lot of this I see. I'll be honest, sometimes I'm seeing it in the context of suppliers who are not happy with the outcome of a procurement. But still sort of looking through tender documents, etc., gives you a good insight into the ways in which sustainable procurement is being carried out in the modern age. So today I'm going to cover a number of things. I apologize if they seem a bit disparate. I'm picking out a few things I think are particularly interesting in this field. I'm going to talk about defining value. Well, talking about defining value-based procurement. I'm going to talk a bit about the Procurement Act 2023. Going to talk about some of the resources that are out there to help build in sustainable criteria into procurement, and going to talk about sort of a bit of my personal experience and a cautionary tale from my practice, something that I saw go wrong, even though the intentions were clearly good on a project. So to start with, sort of the importance, what do we mean by value-based procurement? Well, it's, as Connor said, really, it's shifting the focus from cost to overall value, quality, efficiency, innovation. And I think also I'd add to that, what's really important is life cycle costing, not just the kind of the upfront cost, like if you're buying printers, what's it cost me to buy the hardware, but also looking behind that and saying, well, what about the toner I need to buy over the life cycle of the project, etc. Or sometimes, what about the environmental impact? Because that's a cost as well. It's something that defines long-term benefits, sustainability, social value, economic development. Environmental sustainability can be things like the circular economy, recycling, etc. And I think, I would start with a question, and that is, into which part of the procurement should we embed these values? And the answer is really all of it, from cradle to grave, from the pre-design, the planning, the engagement with suppliers, evaluation, the contract terms and specifications. Every single stage of that journey offers the possibility to incorporate and reflect your values. And in a few of the case studies I'll talk about today very briefly, what's quite interesting is that you see good examples of sustainability objectives being built into different bits of the procurement process. And I think they give some inspiration about how we can all help achieve these things. So, pre-procurement, that's the stage where you're defining your need. You're really considering what you really need. that should be an internal dialogue, really, a real consideration about how the organization operates, what's needed to fulfill its purposes, whether you need less than you think you do. Market engagement, going out there, finding out what solutions are there and what's realistic. Specification and contract terms, how do we want the job done? For example, recycled materials, how will we build those in? What requirements will we be imposing on bidders? And award criteria, what solutions will we reward? How will we do that? And what are some of the guardrails around that? So those are not all of the different stages, but just for some of them. Next slide, please. So obviously today, Construction Playbook and Digital Playbook are things relevant to our discussion. And these really are frameworks for implementation of digital strategies in procurement and also best practice. The digital side comes through a bit in both. They're complementary, the two playbooks, but with different emphases, I would say. You see in both this concept of digital twins, BIM technology, AI, and machine learning. And if you're interested in AI, I would encourage you to look at Professor Albert Grells's papers on that. He's got some really interesting ideas on how to build AI into procurement. I know that's something that is happening steadily. I think that's really exciting, but I think we also have to be really careful about AI. We've all read about AI hallucinations and the risk of AI making those sorts of errors in everyday procurement, could be catastrophic with calculations and things and misapprehensions. But those are the emphases of those two guides. There is the guidelines are important and influential, but I would say that one of the areas where they lack is I've come across instances where suppliers feel frustrated that they've not been followed, and it's obviously they are guidelines, and that there's not a hard line requirement to follow them, even if it's frowned upon if they're not followed. I'm going to talk a bit about building social value into procurement. We talk a lot about environmental criteria, climate change, etc. But social value criteria is something we've seen steadily built into procurement processes, and encouraged in things like circulars from the Cabinet Office. So that can be things like encouraging apprenticeships, encouraging local businesses, something that comes through in the new Procurement Act, and of course, environmental sustainability. There's some interesting, I don't know if you've come across a new piece of legislation called the Social Partnership and Public Procurement Wales Act 2023, but that offers quite a comprehensive framework for contracting authorities in Wales to follow and make sure that sort of social criteria are built into procurements. And one of the things I found interesting about that piece of legislation is that where certain things are deviated from, where guidelines are deviated from by a contracting authority, there are certain obligations to report that to the Welsh ministers, and possibilities for the Welsh ministers to investigate deviations that they think are unwise. Next slide, please. We are in the we're in the post-Brexit era. One of the things I think is really exciting about the post-Brexit era is that I think that it's great that the EU and the UK can both go on their separate paths, but continue to talk to each other and continue to learn from each other. Because although we now have our own statute, another thing that is very exciting, there is still, I think it's fair to say, a degree of alignment between the two regimes to such an extent that, I think it's interesting to keep an eye on the resources that are available from the EU. And there are some really, really good resources which can be read as a complement to the construction and digital playbooks and other guidance. If you go on the EU's dedicated green procurement website, there's a wealth of really useful tools and things that you can sort of consider, things like guidelines on award criteria, successful case studies, guidelines on how to conduct a market engagement, which I think are quite helpful, and also really quite detailed guidance on how to lawfully adopt green and sustainability criteria. One of the big things two big things I would say in the case law about award criteria are it must always be measurable. There was a case called EVN where the contracting authority very vaguely said, okay, tell us about how much renewable energy you use. And that wasn't it was something where you could get answers that were apples and pears. And that was not permitted. And it must also be linked to the subject matter. So I think I've gone back a slide. Can we go back forward a slide? Andrew, I think we've gone back a slide. Sorry, I lost my slides, I think.
Sorry, just bear with me 1 second. I'm not sure what's happening there. Fantastic. Can you see the slides now? There we go.
I can. Thank you. So I think it was one forward from here.
Yes,
yeah.
The EU law.
So, so the other thing I think that where there is some trepidation about award criteria and sustainability is that the award criteria must always be linked to the subject matter of the contract, and that comes out of a case called Concordia Bosses, where basically the contracting authority asked about emissions that were being used on the bosses. That was challenged, and the court said, well, no, there is a link because the authority has an interest in what effect the bosses will have on the on their local environment for which they're responsible, e.g. acid rain effects. Now, I think sort of with this linkage between contract subject matter and award criteria, I'll give you some examples. A question that would not be permissible would be, so tell us how much renewable energy you use as an organization. That's not linked to the subject matter. That's more about you as an organization. But if you were to ask, how much renewable energy will you use in the course of this project and carrying out this project, or how much of the materials will you recycle? That then is going to get linked to the subject matter and is more likely to be permissible. Now, this remains relevant because the linkage to subject matter is by and large retained in the Procurement Act as a requirement. Some of my favorite EU case studies, which are all available on this site, I think some of them offer really good examples of procurements where these requirements have been built in. The first one in Strasbourg was one where there was a real emphasis on construction companies reusing materials, and there they did two things. They built into the specifications minimum requirements for minimum amounts of specified materials being recycled. And then in the award criteria, they awarded additional credit if you could show you would go beyond those bare minima and actually deliver more than the minimum that they were requesting. The next project in Prague, I won't speak to in too much detail, but I think it's a really good. That one was a design construction project where there was a really innovative use of BIM to achieve life cycle costing. And I think with BIM, I think it's something that I see in procurement. I sometimes wonder if it's kind of being done as a sort of a peer pressure thing, that we think this is good. It's all sort of motherhood and apple pie. But I think it's that doing it that way as a checkbox exercise, you can miss the opportunities that BIM can deliver. And I think this Prague project is a really good example of how you can really reduce cost and achieve efficiency and coordination across different disciplines. The last one in Holland was another one where basically the competitive dialogue procedure was used to develop innovative solutions for circular economy friendly bridge in North Holland. It is worth looking at as well. I'll just also mention there's other guidance as well. Australia has got very good sustainability procurement guidelines, and another really good set of guidelines from the Office of Government Procurement in Ireland is also available online. Next slide, please. So onto the Procurement Act, and this is really interesting because I think the Procurement Act does actually offer quite a number of opportunities in different ways to really bring home and embed value-based procurement in a number of different ways. Now, the first one I'd mention is that there is greater encouragement of pre-market engagement and transparency. The new regulations in sections 15 and 16, I think, they're far more express about what you can talk about in the preliminary markets engagement stage. They're quite clear. For example, you can talk about contract terms, etc. And I think that's helpful because I think authorities like to see that. They like to have that badge of approval for them doing something that they consider innovative, but they don't want to be criticized for. I think pre-market engagement as well, people get nervous about because of competition law, because of the legitimate concerns about, you know, having competitors in a room and all chatting amongst each other and with you about what that could breed. But there are ways and means of mitigating that risk. Section 16 is really going to encourage people to publish notices before they start preliminary market engagement. The rules on specifications have changed. Now, I think Section 56 of the Procurement Act, when you compare that with Regulation 42 of the PCRs in 2015 and the equivalent provisions in the utilities contracts regs, etc. I'm not sad enough to know those, to know the numbers. I think there is in the new law a greater emphasis on performance and functional requirements rather than sort of looking at this hierarchy of different standards. You can still do this in the existing law, but there is a greater encouragement in Section 56 to draw functional and performance related requirements in specifications, which again I think is freeing people up. Now, something that's not on there that I'll mention that I think is important as well is the fact that under the Act, authorities have now got greater flexibility to set their own processes. And, you know, I think this is really helpful because things like competitive dialogue, etc., they can be quite prescriptive about the different stages and things, and people can worry about, well, how much dialogue can we have? What are the minimum time limits around that? I think what the Procurement Act does is it makes it far more flexible and driven by the authority to set its own procedures, to talk to people, consider things. Connor mentioned the move from the most advantageous tender versus most economically advantageous tender. I think that the Audit Office shares his observations that they're concerned that you could see something that approximates just more to, you know, as the Audit Office said, 100% community benefit rather than thinking about cost, something that's exercising the Audit Office. I think in reality, I think that's unlikely to really happen because I think most authorities are on strict budgets, have got controllers looking over their shoulders, etc. And I think cost will still be something. And I think, you know, there's still a judicial review risk if they go completely off-piste and don't consider cost at all. I also think that a check on this will be the continuing requirement for award criteria to be linked to the subject matter of the contract itself. Although to some extent you can get around that a little bit by setting the requirements in the specifications and then linking the awards to the specifications. Debarment grounds, I'll mention. There are some quite strict debarment grounds now, and people who find themselves on subject of debarment might be publicly listed in a debarment list. Some of the new grounds of debarment include crimes against the environment, labour market. Well, I said labour market crimes. I think it's actually labour market misconduct. So again, people will want to be avoiding those things because they will not want to see themselves debarred from public procurement processes. Breach of the Modern Slavery Act, that's also something that you can be debarred for. That's current ground as well. Section 52 of the Act is really interesting because for contracts above £5 million in value, authorities are going to have to include 3 key performance indicators in their contract, which will be continually monitored on an annual basis. And your performance against those KPIs will be published. And also, if you fail to achieve KPIs, you'll be at risk of that being made public, misused as information by your competitors as ammunition, and also potentially, you know, you could even see implied rights of contract termination invoked. under sections 48 and I think it's 79. So that's something to keep you awake at night. But I think what the KPI requirements do, they incentivize people to do what they say. And two, they also incentivize authorities to think about setting sustainability targets as part of those KPIs and really making that important and monitored and something that the supplier really takes seriously and is incentivized to take seriously. Next slide, please. So coming to the end of my stint now, I said I would share a personal story, rather a client story. I think I've anonymized this sufficiently. It's quite a long time ago, but basically, it's a cautionary tale about setting realistic expectations. I acted for a software developer SME who observed a problem that a public body was having with its procurement processes and observed that it was spending far too much money on a certain thing. It had a brilliant idea involving its own proprietary software, approached a public body who were really interested, but said, understandably, we'll have to put that out to procurement. We can't just contract directly with you. That public body then went to an external law firm who did an absolutely excellent standout job, and no criticism at all or sarcasm intended when I say that. It was a really good technical piece of work that really protected their client really well with regard to things like IPR. The problem was it went too far. The problem was it was saying things like, for a value of a pilot that was under a certain value, although with the extension to with the option to extend, which is what took it over the threshold, that he would be handing that company would be handing over their source code. There were other things in there they didn't like as well, like that they were contracting with a subsidiary of a public body that could have been sold off, and there were indications indeed they were going to sell it off. And the client basically said, look, that asks me to give away the family silver. When it was all explained to them, when we reviewed the terms and explained everything to them, they withdrew from the procurement. And at least in our client's view, what they ended up with was an inferior solution from somebody who'd kind of acted, their client had kind of in the end been the stalking horse, and somebody else had come along with a piece of software that probably wasn't as valuable or effective. So potentially there, what occurred was a lose-lose situation, and the continuing inefficiency of the certain thing that this public body was doing. So I think that's just a cautionary tale, to be realistic. Now, under section 54, which of the new law, proportionality, I think, is removed as a requirement for specification setting. So while that is good in terms of flexibility, I think I would just caution that people should be wary of going too far and imposing things that are basically not deliverable or are going to scare away suppliers from the procurement, because that will be self-defeating, however well-intentioned. So my conclusions for suppliers in the new regime: keep your ear to the ground, make sure that you engage in market engagement. I have given you those tools today, not only for the authorities amongst you, but also for the suppliers, because what I hope will happen in the new world is that there will be more dialogue between suppliers and authorities, and suppliers able to share best practice, their own best practice, other things like those case studies that I've talked about, and others in the UK and elsewhere, Australia, the US, and really have a good dialogue, and continue to talk between jurisdictions, between suppliers and authorities, and really promote best practice. Buyers, do be bold, take advantage of the flexibility but at all times, keep it proportionate, even if under the new Procurement Act you don't have to anymore, because proportionality has been removed as a general principle for most things. So those are all my comments, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Paul. I think that was some great insight into the new Procurement Act in terms of how the value-based procurement fits within it, and how we can maybe as an industry start to embrace this, specifically across the construction, the consultancy and engineering perspective. So Joe, I'm going to come to you finally. So apologies for that slight mix-up earlier. Really looking forward to hearing your thoughts and your observations about how National Highways are essentially doing this and embedding value-based procurement in their organisation. So over to you. Looking forward to it.
That's great. And Andrew, just so that I understand, can I flick my own slides, or how does that work, or are you controlling it?
I'm happy for you to Chris Whitty it and just let me know when you want the next slide. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. So good morning, everybody. Really nice to be here. My name's Jo Wilkes. I'm Head of Procurement Delivery for National Highways, which means that within my team, actually, we look after everything from procurement of consultants and those sort of services that we need for design of works, or even sort of extra accounting staff at particular critical times, through to traffic officer vehicles and uniform and PPE, all the way through to roads procurement. So it's a very vast and very different set of procurements, if you like, that we look at across the piece. And of course, in these months, we've been doing all of our training around the new Procurement Act, because this is a massive change, to most government organisations. And I'm sure you won't hear any public sector procurement head of, saying that this is an easy task, because actually, the levels of transparency here, are vast. And we're going from what we used to put out, which was about 3 notices, to about 7 notices as an overall, to tell you which stage we're at with every single procurement. And actually, in our more complex procurements, things like SDF, for any of you that were on SDF, or M&R, those sort of procurements, potentially up to about 13 notices. And with that comes a whole administrative burden that I won't bore you with, but you get the picture that we're excited by the flexibility, but we're also very cognizant of the fact that we've got a lot of work to do. So next slide, please, Andrew. So what does it do for us, and how do we see this benefit? For us as National Highways, actually, this was music to our ears, because having to generally go with the most economically advantageous tender was challenging at times, because actually we knew what happened. Everybody knows what happens. Somebody puts a mediocre quality submission in, but actually puts a really good commercial price in, and they win. Because actually, it doesn't matter how you skew the numbers, and you do 70-30, 80-20, whatever threshold you do, we all play with the numbers. But actually, as soon as you start to get people that have got an average to good level of quality submission, if they've got the right price, they're going to win it every day of the week. So this is a brilliant thing for us that we are so delighted to be able to see. But you can see from us, we feel that this is going to encourage that innovation and sustainability. Yes, we've got that increased transparency, but it also enables us to help support some of those smaller businesses, and actually help us define things in such a way that says, actually, we really are looking for somebody that's going to bring some extra social value aspects, and that's what we're defining value of for this procurement, to actually get us to the right place. So Andrew, if you could move to the next slide. You can obviously see that there's a whole pile of work going on in the background. The most critical thing for me is making sure the teams prepare well-scoped procurement documents, fit for purpose, making sure that spec is right, the tender documentation right, not having tender amendment after tender amendment while we think of things in, generally because of tender queries that you guys raise, that we suddenly think, oh, do you know what, that's a good idea, or, we've missed that, and hence putting that in. So actually starting up front with that well-scoped procurement. Certainly my knowledge of that is that actually what used to probably take us 14-15 months to come out to market with, in terms of pulling our contract documents together, pulling our scope, we're actually starting a lot earlier. So we're now actively looking to start procurement journeys, if you like, to get something to market 2 to 2.5 years before we will actually award a contract. Feels endless, but just the amount of governance and the amount of making sure that that scope fit is right, is what we're trying to do. Pre-market engagement. Some of you will have been on the journey with us through things like IDF, Integrated Delivery Framework, where we did a lot of market engagement. It's really useful to us buyers. We love pre-market engagement. As Paul said, it gives us that ability to check and challenge and to put our thoughts to you before we've put something out there that could be challenged, and we've got lawyers all over us, to sort of say, what do you think? What do you think of this scenario? In the old negotiation style, think of it like throwing our elk steak out and throwing it out and putting a really outlandish idea out there. And some of the times in IDF, we purposefully, showed our thinking to be able to say, these are the extremes that it could be. It could be as little as this. It could be as large as this. What do you think? And actually being able to gain that is really, really good for us. Procuring with purpose. I say to my team, at the end of the day, we are all here to make sure that we spend taxpayers' money well. But if we can spend taxpayers' money well and bring social value benefit, surely that makes us all feel better about what we're doing. That actually we're doing something good, and just being a good human surely says that is the right thing to do. So that greater focus on social value, environmental considerations, economic prosperity. If you can put work in a particular area where you know that they're really struggling, it's a deprived area or whatever, brilliant. Let's do that. Just being aware as well, I'm very conscious of what we call bidder fatigue, where lots and lots of bidders, put tenders in for frameworks where actually not much goes through in terms of value. So one of the things, I'm always encouraging my team is go and look at every framework that's out there. Go and look at the scope. Go and look at the general terms and conditions that are there. Can we use them? Can we use something that somebody's already paid, lots of money to invest their time and bid for, to actually go and work that? And generally across government, there's an increased focus on that knowledge of what frameworks are out there, how many of them have been enabled, and how can we use it? So just to bring that through. Those greater opportunities for SMA is, some of you will have heard of Scheme Delivery Framework, SDF. We put 52 suppliers on that framework, of which 32% of them were SMEs, which was the largest framework for SMEs at the time. It's done wonders for a lot of them, but it hasn't been without challenge. We've had to change our processes for SMEs to be able to understand that complexity. We've had to, even in the tender process, some of you may remember we ran extra tender clinics against every single item that might come up, including social value, and how to demonstrate social value in a good way, so that actually SMEs could understand the ask, if you like, before we came out and did that. And then the most difficult part for us and for any government organisation in these new regs is this emphasis on better contract management and supply performance. The administrative burden of that is going to be a challenge. Every single year we're going to have to put a performance information out there. We're going to have to make sure the spend is up to date. That can be challenging in organisations of this sort of size, where actually there's lots of projects going through, compensation events, CMAR, early warnings, etc. It is a challenge. But also how people are measured against those key performance indicators. We are very, very conscious that is going to drive a lot of work and a lot of thinking. I'm keen, though, to make sure, and certainly one of the conversations we've had, and I'm sure other government bodies are having, is how do we make sure that those KPIs are proportionate, as Paul said, but also are around general themes that we find are important. And it's not just the buyer that's decided these 3 KPIs are the ones that he's going to talk about. So actually for us, making sure that all road, maintenance, KPIs are all measured on the same 3 KPIs, because actually, that's important as well, to make sure that we're measuring consistently, and we haven't got some contract over here that's been measured on very, very little KPIs against another one. So making sure we've got that consistency. One of the things that we'd have liked in the Act, and we did ask for it, is that word in there, that actually that we had consistent KPIs across category areas. That would have been a preference for most government bodies. Okay. Next slide, please, Andrew. I must say as well, if you've got any questions, there is a Q&A at the end, but by all means, just type it in the chat and I'll try and pick those up as well. So we are doing a lot of work trying to support what we call value creation. I know there was a comment anyway in the chat about what's the difference between outcome procurement and value-based procurement. This is it for me. It's about value creation. So yeah, when we are devising procurement strategies, we are desperately trying to look at the lotting for those contracts to actually say, how can we lot this in a specific way to make sure that not just tier ones, but also SMEs get a piece of the action? So again, I'm going to take you back to SDF, where we had a super region supplier that was generally a tier one, but we had a regional supplier as well in the same category area that was generally an SME, and thinking through that, how do they work together? How do we split the work between those two lots? What makes it go into a super region lot? What makes it go into a regional lot? All those thought processes, but making sure there are opportunities for SMEs to be able to bid and to win in certain category areas. We have designed what's called the social enterprise DPS, and I've got a couple of slides on this, but we've enabled it. It is a DPS full of social enterprises. That means that you can, as if you are a supplier to National Highways, you can use that DPS to go and procure goods, stationery, furniture, event space, etc., from a social enterprise, which of course you can then use in tender submissions, not just for us, but for other people who I'm sure will want to hear about how much you spend with social enterprises. But it's all there for you to use free of charge, of course. It's just one of the things that we do as part of our social value plan. Collaboration and cross-disciplinary work. We co-designed that SEDPS with our supply chain. So people like Amy, Colas, Kia, designed how it would look, how the call-offs would look, that really met our requirements for a regulated procurement, but also met their governance processes to make sure it would still go through their process okay. And that's worked really, really well. And as I said before, in one of the things, scheme delivery framework, we hosted numerous tender clinics on specific subjects. That's been a common theme now. We did it on A303 Stonehenge. We've done it on Lower Thames Crossing. We've done it on a numerous procurements since scheme delivery framework that says actually we're going to try and teach, if you like, suppliers, what's important to us. And finally, in terms of supporting that value creation, working in partnership, sharing best practice through that social value supplier group, where any of our suppliers can join that group and sort of we talk about best practice in social value, and really try and deliver things together. Now, one of the key things I want to say to you is, listen, when a buyer puts a procurement out and it asks for social value, use the tender query process, use the tender clinics to ask really pertinent questions about exactly what social value they're looking for. Are they looking for it in a region, or actually are they looking for it elsewhere? Are they looking for it to particularly tick certain pillars, i.e., are they looking for COVID-19 recovery, which is one of the pillars of social value, or are they looking for economic prosperity in a certain area, or are they looking for apprenticeships? What are they actually looking for? Use that tender query process. The worst thing I see is bidders putting proposals in that are brilliant, but it almost gives us the Rolls-Royce version of actually what we've asked for. And then of course, what's happened is they've costed themselves out of the market. So use that tender query process to help the buyers as well focus down to actually we are looking for social value, but we are looking for it in this region, and we are particularly looking for you to work with schools, work with ex-offenders, whatever it is, to drive that. That's key. And certainly what I'm sort of teaching to my team is, listen, when we talk about this, we need to be specific. What are we asking for? What are we really trying to drive here? Okay, next slide, please, Andrew. You know, we can talk as well about, you know, just because we've taken the you know, from meat to mat, it doesn't mean the economics go away, but we are trying to drive efficiencies and transparency. We are trying to work with our supply chain, and really sort of, you know, look at common aspects. You know, what can we do? What can we do to sort of bulk purchase together? You know, can we look at plant and machinery together on a scheme? And actually, is it even that National Highways goes and leases or buys the plant and machinery that everybody then uses? You know, does that sort of category approach work, and does it drive efficiency for everybody if we do it that way? This is just a typical example, you know, of one of the things we've done, which is, you know, drainage plastics of all things. You know, very minuscule, if you like, in a tender process, but because everybody was doing it, you know, we've seen some massive efficiencies, you know, 28% saving on those categories, you know, just by looking at that sort of total value of ownership process. And that, you know, what I'm trying to say to you here is, just because the economic has been taken out of that, please don't think we've stopped focusing on it. We are still there, but we're trying to do it in a more collaborative way with everybody. Next slide, please. So I did just want to talk to you about, you know, National Highways' view of social value. So, you know, we define it as just every benefit that either ourselves or our supply chain deliver for people, you know, whether it's the environment, the economy, however it works. But it's about transforming lives. So it's not just about, you know, us throwing some money at a football club. You know, it's not just about that. That's great, you know, good for you. But actually, what I'd really like to see is you getting an ex-offender into your local football club, because actually he's got a job with you, and you know, he also likes to play football. That is proper social value. We call it social value in action. And actually, that's what we're trying to drive, that sort of thing. And it is just about, you know, it's the right thing to do. You know, yes, it's best practice. Yes, it's politically important. Yes, our customers demand it. You know, but taxpayers want us to do good, but it is generally the right thing to do. So next slide, please. So this is it. The social enterprise DPS is a quick and easy way to support organisations. If you are a supplier to National Highways, you can use this system. I will put in the chat the email address if you're interested in it. There's an email address. You can go talk to the team. They'll tell you how you can buy from it. You know, if you also know of a charity, maybe you work with a charity, tell them about it. It's a really quick and easy way for them to get, if you like, money from some of these schemes, because we want to procure stationery, furniture, event space, etc. from them. Okay. Next slide. So that's it really. Find out more, you know, you can click on any of our links, but I'm really happy to take questions if you've got them.
Thanks, Joe. That was really insightful, and some great examples of how value-based procurement is being essentially rolled out across industry. So we're going to take questions just now. I think, Andrew, you were going to see if there's any in the chat. I can see there's one there, but I suppose for others, do they want to add their questions in the chat or put their hands up? I think that would be appropriate. We've got about 7 minutes, so we do have time to take a few. Shall we start with the one in the chat, Andrew, if that's okay?
Yes, I know, Joe, you touched upon this, but it may be worth expanding on this a bit more. Louise asks, how does outcomes-based approach differ from value-based procurement? So why the two terms? I think it's just that terminology piece. And I know you touched on that, didn't you, Joe, if you want to respond?
Yeah, and I think you in some ways you're right. Depends how you perceive outcome-based. But for me, you know, if somebody says it's outcome-based, really what they're looking for is, I want to build a bridge. You know, and as long as they've built that bridge, that's outcome based. But actually, when it's value based procurement, it's about, I want to build a bridge whilst bringing a pile of value, and actually we're going to market based on that value that you're bringing.
Thanks, Joe. Paul, have you any thoughts on that? I've one or two. So
Yeah,
if you don't,
I have. I mean, I think sort of complementary to what Joe said. I mean, I'd give an example. If you were procuring a if you were procuring a pipe work, a type of pipe, outcome based would be the pipe must achieve a throughput of X amounts of square of well, whatever unit of liquid must go through it per hour. That would be outcome based or functionality based. Whereas if you went to must be so wide, so high, look like this, be made out of this material, that's getting more away from the functionality. And I had a case about this where somebody was unhappy about a standard that was going through a standard body, which they said, look, this isn't functionality based, and our product doesn't look like that, but it competes with other products that do look like that. And if this standard is adopted, then we're going to be shut out of procurement processes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that's my take on it anyway.
Okay. Well, thank you, Paul. I think I'll just to come in on that point, and I can see, Louise, you've added an additional question, which I think I can answer off at the same time. I'm probably coming at this from a different perspective, having been involved in the development of the value toolkit and Flex 390 and all the value-based decision-making approach. I think that there is a subtle difference between them. I think an outcome-based approach to me is about focusing on the outcomes you want to achieve right through the whole delivery life cycle, right from the start, right through procurement. Whereas I think value-based procurement is making decisions based on those outcomes. So I think they are one and the same. I think we're all agreed on that. And repeating on your second question, Louise, which is what drives the focus on different pillars, and I think it was directly to Joe about do you have a strategy for making sure all of them get equal attention? I think just before I ask Joe to come in, I think that's where we see some of the value-based decision-making approach really come to the fore. It gives that opportunity to prioritize between a range of different outcomes that are sought. And I suppose coming back on your point as well, Joe, about querying during that, or asking questions during that query, that tender period, and clarifications around where do you want the social value focus to be, for example. I think the use of value-based decision-making could potentially give tenderers and contracting authorities one language around this is particularly important, a regional level of social value, a local level of social value, a social value in this area or this particular outcome. So I think that's probably my view. It's probably slightly different, but more than welcome to hear your thoughts, Joe, and as well to pick up on the second part of Lisa's question.
Yeah, so to be honest, I was just typing in chat, but I won't bother now. But yeah, we don't particularly have a strategy as such for driving the focus on the different pillars, but we do measure those social value outcomes against the pillars, and because we do have to report them actually into central government. And then if we see that there are particular pillars that aren't getting any attention, I can give you a live example. Ex-offenders is a key focus area for me right now because we haven't had a lot of traction against that pillar. So we've been doing a lot of work with the prison service, particularly in the Northwest, really to sort of say, actually, we are going to try and get these ex-offenders into work on our roads, to see how we can make that work. So yeah, there's no particular strategy as such, but we are picking up on where I'll be honest, apprenticeships, I could fill that pillar all day long, every day. We always get offered apprenticeships. It's the other stuff, and for me, if you want to drive something different in your tender responses, start picking up on the more unpopular social value outcomes, because they're the ones that they don't get the traction.
Chair, I note Louise has her hand up, but we also have another question from Alistair that I might to address first. Do you think the carbon approach used on LTC will be used on other national highways projects to cover biodiversity and social value, i.e. putting the onus on contractors to commit to solutions at tender stage and being incentivized to keep on improving during construction?
Yes, it definitely will. That was a really easy one. Yes, it definitely will. We've seen some great information come through on LTC, and actually, people putting forward ideas that we just hadn't considered. So yes, it would definitely be part of our processes going forward. Of course, much easier to do when you are procuring a scheme. Much harder to do on something like SDF, where actually it's a framework. So yeah, it'll be proportionate to what we're doing, but yes, if we can do, we will be.
Thanks, Joe. Good answer response. There you go, Joe.
Thank you, Joe. I suppose we've kind of run to the end of the questions in the chat. We've got a minute left, so unless there are any other burning questions from the call, I would like to say thank you very much to all our speakers. Your insights and your experience has been very much welcome, and it's been great to hear. Great to hear that I think value-based procurement is starting to get more and more traction. I think the benefits are seen. I think the Procurement Act is giving us more opportunities to embed it in day-to-day delivery. So it's positive. I think let's see where this journey takes us over the next 12 to 24 months as the Procurement Act gets set in and we all start to operate under it. But thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time, and thank you for everyone on the call for joining, members. And Andrew, unless you want to finish up with, I think that's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Just in the closing moments, just to make you aware that the nominations are now open for our annual Consultancy and Engineering Awards. Information available on our website. Other than that, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Cheers, folks. Thank you.